so welcome, Catherine, to an episode of geNEOusChats, and thanks for making the time to be with us. And if you would just take a minute just to let the network know what you do.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. So I'm an education writer and strategist, which is what is that? Well, basically, I've worked in developing online solutions for schools really for the last 20 years or so. So I've done a lot of programs with many people across, from BBC to Google to others. But there was always the point for me was always to sort of stretch things to create things that are more relevant and real life for children. So that's where my experience is, and out of that, I've also developed a writing practice and creating resources for schools, but always with that same sort of view that make it very child centric. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and for the last 4 years, I was chief educator, an interesting title, at Little Inventors. And what I did there was really sort of create the challenges and the direction that we were taking in terms of how to engage schools. And that was at primary, elementary, and secondary level as well. And interestingly, it was a global project as well. So I wasn't working just in the UK, I was working a lot in Canada and in China and the UAE. So it was a really interesting project to look at how you could uh, create something that could work for so many people across so many different parables.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to dig into there, and I'm just going to start right at the kind of the foundation of it, because what you're talking about is something external. You're bringing something into schools and helping them engage, and you're mentioning child centric as something that I guess that you're supporting. So what is it about schools that why isn't that already inside? Why is it that your role is necessary, to come in externally and promote this?
Well, there's a bit of a slight irony, I suppose, is that a lot of education is done from the top down. So it's like we're doing things for teachers. How about we did things for the people who actually need to learn, for the kids? Because we tend to sort of make a lot of assumptions about children, and they are like vessels to be filled, and that we need to tell them what they need to know. However, children are naturally, there's a brilliant quote by Derry Hannum, who knows a thing or two about education. He was an Ofsted inspector, and he's part of a movement towards democratic education. And he said this lovely thing, which is children, it's almost impossible to stop children and young people from learning. Somehow, schools almost manage it. And and one of the issues is that children are basically not given any agency or freedom within their own education. We are not trying to create things that they can relate to. They are told this is the set of outcomes you've got to do, and you've got this is the right answer. This is how, if you don't do that, you fail. And it's a bit of a systematic way that sadly that puts them in a situation where they sort of shut off. The education system doesn't feel like it's relating to them, which is why we need to bring back the sort of child-centeredness to it. We need to look at what is it that children care about? How do we inspire them into learning? Because that joy of learning is there. It just needs to be ignited.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm definitely not going to hide my complete agreement with that. I probably
Stop
wouldn't
it.
do a good job of hiding it anyway, but um,
I should say that I have nothing but immense respect and admiration for teachers and for schools. I think the job they're doing is extraordinary, and what they have to do is insane in a way. The amount of work that they've got to do is insane. And the problem is that a lot of their job has become an admin job. It's going to be a box ticking exercise, and it's not the sort of, most people that go into teaching will go there as wanting to facilitate learning. That's what they will sort of, the dream when you're coming into teaching is that. However, the reality of it is going to be very different. And the number of teachers that I speak to who apologize to the children and to the parents to say, I know this is really boring, but we've got to go through it. So, it's a very, it's there. We know that this issue is there. It's documented immensely. There's a lot of research about it. We know we need to transform education. We need to move from the Victorian model into the 21st century. We know that, so this amazing fact as well. So the Institute of the Future established that 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't been invented yet. And yet we're not transforming our education. Yet we are still teaching children as if they're going to go into like careers that they're going to follow through their entire lives. We don't know what these careers are. How can we direct them in there? And why are we not trying to actually equip them with the skills before sort of looking at subjects? Start with the skills, show them what are the things that will be useful for them. So creative thinking, problem solving, all of these things, critical thinking, lateral thinking, these are things that they'll be able to use in everything that they do. And those are the qualities that employers look for as well. So why are we not nurturing that foremost and using all the brilliant stuff, which is maths and science, as inspiration tools? That's, I think, is something that would really change education for everyone and make children much more interested as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's almost like if you're focusing on the content, it's almost like we are as adults projecting onto the children through this kind of I know what you need to know, which is a little bit misguided to say the least,
Mm.
is based on our current understanding of the world and our own experiences, and is definitely not fit for the instability of the future. And that's for sure. So focusing on skills is clearly the way. But I mean, it seems like by making education this sort of box ticking exercise, it almost benefits nobody. And I remember having said exactly what you said there, apologizing for having to do something. And I've uttered those words myself as a teacher. I've said, look, I don't enjoy this any more than you do. We've got to do it. I'm going to try and make it as fun as I can to
Fab.
get, and we'll get through it together. And it's almost this sense of surviving the experience together. So
Exactly.
teachers don't want to be there. They've got initiative fatigue, with all the things thrown at them. And it only seems to benefit the people who have to hold up the Excel in the meeting and say, look at all these things that we've achieved for
Aren't we
political
doing
capital.
well?
Yeah,
Yes.
but nobody's.
But it's short-sighted because it's numbers on the page as opposed to actually preparing young people for the future.
Well,
And that
in terms of that, for the young people in the future, you've mentioned a ton of stuff that you've done. And I wonder, out of all of these things, what would you say has made the program or the approach that you think has made the most impact? You've looked at it and thought, wow, this is transformational. And why was that so?
it's very simple, and it's actually giving children time, giving them freedom, and giving them the chance to actually just giving them a voice, the opportunity to actually say what they think and without telling them all the time, leading them through everything. So I've got another example that I use a lot because it was so striking to me. I went to do a workshop in a school, in a primary school with year fours, and it was about getting them to sort of come up with invention ideas. And before the class, the teacher said to me, it'll be really interesting to see what they come up with because the only way to describe these children is they're quite low on imagination. Now, what I need to also say is that again, I thought this was a really good teacher because in the classroom he knew all the kids, he knew how to talk to them, he was sort of taking them from one place to the other, he was engaging them, he was really there, he was really present, and there was a real connection with his class. And but when we did the workshop, I basically said, you can do whatever you want, no limit, have fun. If you have any questions, I'll be there and I can help you. If you have any ideas that you're not sure about, do it. If it's silly, doesn't matter. Freedom. And after 45 minutes, the teacher came to me and said, I have never seen them so engaged, and I'm amazed by the ideas that they came up with. And the only thing that this teacher was doing wrong is that every minute of every moment the classroom was occupied by something. There was not a moment to breathe. There was not a moment to just actually let them think. So what are we doing if we're not giving children an opportunity to think? Only in sort of like very sort of precise, please make sure that you include your fronted adverbials, the famous fronted adverbials, in this sort of paragraph. Can you make sure you do this? Can you make sure you do that? All of these things are constraints. Free them from constraints and actually let them show you the way through their own learning.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful idea, and it's exactly what you said at the beginning. You talked about top down. So the top down approach is to try to fill every moment, and we will tell you what you need to learn. Here's the outcomes, and we will scaffold it all around you. And scaffolding is a word that I think works both ways. Now, it can work. You can talk about it as support, which I think is fine. If you can think about, okay, they might go this way, they might go that way, and if they do, we can think about this and that. But again, making sure that they are directing the activities.
Hmm.
but we too often talk about scaffolding as this, as you said, it's more as barriers. It's a structure that inhibits that
Yeah.
creative freedom, which is an intoxicating idea. But do you think that teachers, is it? Do you think teachers have the natural inclination to sort of want to let go?
Um, I think it's probably an impossible question to answer because everyone would be different. I think at the moment they are not given the means to let go. And I think also the other thing to say is that, again, to balance things out, is that it's freedom within a structure because
Yeah,
you do need that. Children need boundaries to sort of get to the best place. But this is where I keep on talking about facilitating knowledge as opposed to teaching from the top down. It's like, how do you sort of bring them on a journey? You interest them, you sort of give them a little bit of this, and then you let them sort of run with it. And you go, okay, well, that was interesting. How about this? And it seems like an impossible thing to do in a framework of having 30 kids in a classroom. However, you can lead a group and you can actually give them a voice as well and just learn from it. And you can basically use that to riff off it, I think, is one of you. But that stuff takes a level of freedom that not only the children need, the teachers need too. They need to have permission to bring that level of freedom in the classroom. And that's something that, because of the current circumstances with the government sort of pressure and everything that's happening, it feels like there's no room for that. So the first thing that goes when you have, I've got the example of my son yesterday, who is 9. They're doing a brilliant project over the next term. They're doing a Disney production of The Lion King as a class. And it's brilliant. So they all get involved, they sort of get the costumes, they sort of learn their lines, sort of work together. It's a brilliant thing to have something to look forward to, especially this year, something that brings a community of children together after being away for so long. That's a fantastic thing. And yesterday he came back and said, oh, we didn't do Disney yesterday because we had to catch up on maths. So what's the first thing? What's the first thing that goes? It's these activities which are absolutely core right now. Children are at this stage when they're coming back to school after a year of being away. Teachers have been traumatized as well by what they've had to go to be put through, having to teach online, offline, and everything. And what we need right now is for them to have these opportunities to sort of nurture their love of being there and being together. So the idea of these challenges or these projects, I think, is incredible, incredibly powerful right now. Yet they are still sort of seen as optional.
yeah. It's almost like they're frivolous. If they're the first thing that gets cut, then it makes it very clear where the priorities lie.
Exactly. And I don't think that's the. I think talking to a lot of teachers, that's not how they will feel.
Mhm.
But at the same time, how do you balance out the priorities that you're being hammered with? So
Yeah.
it's a rock and a hard place basically because there's what you would like to do, and there's a reality of what you are being asked and demanded to do.
Do you think there's a halfway house? I mean, I'm certainly not advocating that as an ideal because personally, I would like to see a complete transformation, an overhaul of the system. What you're talking about you've mentioned a couple of times freedom and agency being the underpinning core concepts of our approach. However, being a realist and understanding that change takes time, people take time to change their minds. Is there kind of halfway house where you think that teachers within the current confines might be able to develop approaches that give learners more agency to direct their own course of learning?
It's something that I believe in 100%, and that's where actually I want to position my work.
Mhm.
Because it's all well and good. Yes, the system needs to change. We know that. It's not going to happen like this, certainly not at the moment. And so we need to find ways of integrating that in teachers and schools' lives. And I think this is something that I was successful in achieving when I was working at Little Inventors, because what we did is creating these resources that were curriculum linked. And it could be, I mean, because if you think about invention in that particular case, there's a very simple way to say, well, that fits very well with literacy because it's about developing sort of thinking skills, and it's about developing critical thinking and non-fiction aspects. And so you have to do a little bit of that aspect, and then you can tie it in with science as well because you're thinking about, you might have a theme which might be energy or it might be something else. So there are ways of bringing in the curriculum aspect in this, and rather than the resources that I propose to schools, they are not going to be about telling teachers how to teach the curriculum.
Yeah.
What I want to do is give them a layer to enrich it, to stretch it, and to give the inspiration that is possibly missing from regular materials. So how do we sort of create these little sparks of excitement? And I think that's why I like to do a lot of offer schools challenges that they can take up, because there's something quite exciting about doing a competition, knowing that you can get some recognition, knowing that the school might get something out of it, and by the same time you are still ticking some of the boxes that you need from your curriculum. So it doesn't feel like wasted time. There's nothing worse than giving them something extra to do. We need to give something for teachers that is useful, that supports their teaching, but maybe gives them that little bit of space to do things differently.
It's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's very difficult to come into a school where teachers, I mean, I mentioned initiative fatigue earlier. I think it's a very real thing.
Yes.
And, I mean, every time the political wind shifts and, oh, we're doing this and now we're doing this and now this is the priority and that's the priority. And poor teachers, it just gets fed down all the time. This is the latest thing. But, there is something to be said for, look, this is a way to achieve what you have to achieve, but in a way that's going to actually give you energy.
Yes.
We've seen that when something like the Little Inventors or something, project based learning or somewhere where the learners are have the space to develop freedom of creativity and apply themselves in that way. When they leave, there's something different. When
Mm,
the energy at the end. Um, I've experienced as a teacher where there are sessions where you come out feeling drained
yeah,
and sessions where you can go in feeling drained and come out with twice the energy you had at the beginning. And I think
absolutely.
we need to take note on what is it that's happening in there. And usually it's the kind of session that you're advocating, the kind of approach where
Yes.
there's.
And it's, I mean, we know, like one other thing that we often talked about when I worked with people like, so I worked with I created a financial program called Money Sense for Schools. So I was sort of working on that for years.
With the Bank of England, no? Is that right?
It was NatWest RBS. Uh,
NatWest, okay,
uh,
yeah.
so I worked in an agency that worked with companies to create educational programs within their corporate social responsibility. So financial literacy is maybe not I was certainly the queen of it for one point, and I'm quite happy to sort of do something else now.
Yeah.
But it was also about real life skills and understanding that. And where was I going with that? um, oh gosh, I've completely
The
lost my train.
energy, the way they get involved.
But it was interesting to look at how you could bring those skills to life,
Mm.
by sort of bringing it down and just not necessarily forcing the learning in there, but also the value of it in terms of for the company to sort of bring that in, sort of like to show like the real life coming in the classroom. So they had a lot of volunteers going into all around the UK to sort of deliver things for people that worked in finance going into schools to see the children. And what the response always was from the teachers and the children, that it was, even for financial literacy, it was like gold dust to them, because it was someone external coming in telling them something that was real.
Yeah.
So how do we bring the gold dust in the classroom?
Or how do we, I mean, you say gold dust because it's rare, and how do we make sure that it becomes a
Yes,
standard property,
exactly.
because I find parents, if you talk to parents and you say, hey, we want to get more real life skills in the classroom, you'll find very little resistance, because most parents know that all the stuff I really needed to know, which was how to be mindful, how to regulate my emotions, how to manage my finances at home, how to what a million things that are
Yeah.
just not
No,
focused on.
exactly.
So parents will be on board, I think,
Yeah.
this kind of stuff.
And of course, we have to be mindful that I'm balancing a lot of the statements because they seem very sweeping and very general and all that stuff. But so we also know that the learning that happens at school is only part of a child's education. It's, I think it's about 25% of a child's education is what happens at school. Everything else is very dependent on what's happening at home. So, it's not like to say that parents have no role in doing any of that. But I think there's definitely a way to provide tools and resources for teachers. That's why for me, content is everything.
Yeah.
Excellent content is absolutely everything. And I've got a certain amount of gripes about some of the stuff that I've seen during lockdown, where there were some programs that were pushed, which were for teachers by teachers. And it was like the Victorian classroom delivered through a screen, which is basically the worst of both worlds. Just
Yeah.
having a talking head that's telling you, oh, isn't it great? We're going to do grammar today. and you just have to sit for 25 minutes and just go through a presentation. This is not teaching, this is not learning, this is just an exercise in slight torture, frankly.
Yeah.
So some children will be able to do it, but but none of them will thrive. And I think that's the thing, is that the ones that are struggling will struggle. The one who are above the level will just be bored to tears, and the ones who are just getting by will get by. No one's reaching their potential through that. How is that a good outcome?
Well, the worst possible thing about all of that, the great tragedy, is the self concepts that young children form about themselves, because of those experiences.
Mhm.
That's the great tragedy, isn't it? I mean, somebody who's not thriving in that environment and blames themselves and makes judgment about themselves compared to others.
That's just so, it is heartbreaking and incredibly common because all children start creating their own stories from the age of 3. So from the age of 3, you start getting your sort of sense of this is who I am, this is what I do. The younger they are, the more they will feel like I'm bad or I'm stupid. That's something you hear so much of. Oh, I'm just not, I'm not one of the clever ones. That's just not true. That's just not the case. It's just they're not getting the right sort of stimulation. And what's interesting is that it's not like I don't believe that school has to be exciting all the time, but actually bringing a little bit of excitement. This idea of like, I've just wrote an article recently about things that teachers could do right now to make children enjoy school again when we're coming back into from the pandemic. And my points were really all about maybe 1 hour a week, do like a forum. An hour a week is not going to damage your curriculum teaching, but for 1 hour, give the children a chance to talk and talk about the things that they love. Let them talk about Roblox. Let them talk about, Among Us. Let them talk about pets, whatever it is, but listen to them. Give them a voice in your classroom because they will feel like you care for them and they will have like a reason to be there as well. Like we all want to get the validation. We all want to feel valued. Why are we not sort of bring that in? And doing it through assemblies when you sort of get to stand up because you did, your citizenship award was brilliant this week. It's lovely, but it's still a very formal way that is not coming from the children.
Yeah.
So
And a formal way in which certain types of learners or certain children will thrive and others will not.
we'll shrivel.
Yeah. Yeah.